Welcome to the Western Bowl podcast series, with talks on traditional spiritual teaching and its application in the world today. The intention of the series is to offer something useful for those who are drawn to study themselves and engage practice on the spiritual path. New talks are posted twice each month. The content of the talks is for informational purposes only, and not to provide any kind of counseling, medical, or professional advice. This podcast is titled Gurdjieff's Aphorisms 2, Crystallizing the Permanent I Am. The talk was given by Grimsman on January 4th, 2025 via Zoom. Carl was born into the Gurdjieff Work environment. He attended a children's group during the early years of the New York Foundation and later worked with Mrs. March, a direct student of Gurdjieff, at East Hill Farm. The first two books in his Soul's Traverse series are Sunbridge and The Kindling. In the second talk on the Aphorisms of Gurdjieff, the first was given in January 2024, Carl discusses more of the mystic's maxims, which can be used as reminders for work on self, and which were posted at the Prieure near Paris, where students came in the 1920s. He also reads sections from Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous and Fritz Peter's Boyhood with Gurdjieff, in considering ideas about the divided mechanical self and the possibility of crystallizing a unified self that is free and that has will. Carl speaks about the development of a soul, being and doing, aim and super efforts, and wish, to an audience that includes both those associated with the farm in New York and those from other spiritual traditions. If there is benefit in this talk for you, please consider sharing the link to it or writing a review on social media or on one of the podcast platforms. Carl Grimsman.
As I stood and watched the kindling, flame, and spark, reminding me of a fire in the heart, I thought, we're not so far apart, the stove and I. Kindling is illumination's start. This poem, which I wrote long ago, is appropriate to our theme. Greetings and Happy New Year, everyone. I am exceedingly glad to be with you. There will be 3 parts to my presentation. This short beginning, a much longer main section, and a brief final piece. And after each part, I will open the floor to comments and questions. A note to say that I am just now getting over the flu, so please forgive me if I am not fully my usual effervescent, razor-sharp-minded self. But let's get started. Whereas my last talk, Gurdjieff's Aphorisms, Essence of a Teaching, a year ago, was introductory in nature, this will be at a more advanced level. Please refer to that talk if interested in its edited audio podcast form on westernbowl.org, BAUL, or on YouTube and other places. I present these ideas not as truth or as articles of faith, but because I have found them useful in my life, pivotal even, and enduringly guiding. As Gurdjieff said, I ask you to believe nothing that you cannot verify for yourself. This is very dense material, so I'm going to get right into it and will let the material itself sanctify the space. The subject is our aim of self-transformation from a divided mechanical self to a unified self, able to experience freedom and wield will. Supporting and guiding us will be 10 line quotes by Gurdjieff, except for the last one, including some of his aphorisms. Gurdjieff's aphorisms were first etched in a special script known only to his students on the ceiling canopy of the study house of the Prieure near Paris, which was home to Gurdjieff's group in the 1920s. It was an international stream of seekers who gathered there and with great effort constructed the study house in their first months at the estate, which leads into our first line quote, one of these aphorisms. Here there are neither Russians nor English, Jews nor Christians, but only those who pursue one aim, to be able to be. Here there are neither Russians nor English, Jews nor Christians, but only those who pursue one aim, to be able to be. What does this mean, to be? And even to be able to be? What ability do I need? If to be is more than to merely exist, how does one come to be? How does one become? Gurdjieff taught that we enter this world a divided, mechanical self. In my natural born condition, I am fractured, disjointed, at odds with myself. I don't know which voice to listen to, fall prey to any of them, to whim, to various hungers, feelings of lack, and often any old lie from myself or others. Thus, my internal state is haphazard, often chaos. This is my starting point in life and for tonight's talk. We'll begin with this passage from In Search of the Miraculous, wherein P.D. Ouspensky recollects the words of his teacher, Gurdjieff. Man, such as we know him, the man machine, the man who cannot do, and with whom and through whom everything happens, cannot have a permanent and single I. His I changes as quickly as his thoughts, feelings, and moods, and he makes a profound mistake in considering himself always one and the same person. In reality, he is always a different person, and not the one he was a moment ago. Man has no permanent and unchangeable I. Every thought, every mood, every desire, every sensation says I. And in each case, it seems to be taken for granted that this I belongs to the whole man, and that a thought, desire, or aversion is expressed by this whole. There is no foundation whatsoever for this assumption. Man's every thought and desire appears and lives quite separately and independently of the whole. And the whole never expresses itself for the simple reason that it exists as such, only physically as a thing, and in the abstract as a concept. Man has no individual I. There are instead hundreds and thousands of separate small I's, often entirely unknown to one another, never coming into contact or hostile to each other, mutually exclusive and incompatible. Each moment, man is saying or thinking I, and each time his I is different. Just now it was a thought. Now it is a desire. Now a sensation. Now another thought, and so on, endlessly. Man is a plurality. Man's name is legion, end quote. Legion meaning many. Gurdjieff, of course, using man in the generic sense, men and women. So, how can my disparate parts come together to work as a conscious whole? This is a snippet of an old poem of mine. I am divided within my being, voices buzzing, humming, each an elf. I am not unified in my seeing, so as for my becoming, which self? End quote. That's the crux. Which self? There needs to be a leader. Unity is sometimes equated by Gurdjieff with the arrival of the master, as in his analogy of the horse, driver, and carriage, and his master of the house analogy. In these, the master remains absent and mechanical life continues unless certain conditions are actualized. Gurdjieff speaks to this in Search of the Miraculous. Even the clearest understanding of his possibilities will not bring man any nearer to their realization. In order to realize these possibilities, he must have a very strong desire for liberation and be willing to sacrifice everything, to risk everything for the sake of this liberation, end quote. My personal view is this. If the first great task of the Gurdjieff work is to come out of sleep into consciousness, to awaken, then the second great task is to usher in the master, which is this permanent, unchanging I. We are to become our own master. We must make a place for the master. But how? What is the process?
I wonder if this process that you're talking about, that you're going to be talking about, is that the incompleteness that we were all born with as human beings, that it has to be developed? It's not part of our instinctual being?
Yes, completing ourselves is one way to look at it. As I'm going to speak of, it's the topic of self-unification, which is related to that, I think. All right, then. Please settle in. This is the main body of the talk, which will be on the topic of self-unification. The idea, as Gurdjieff puts it, is to crystallize something. This is when finer substances coalesce and accumulate, as in the crystallization of rock. It is the incremental forming of something durable and precious. This formation will vastly alter one's life and, according to Gurdjieff, is the structure that can survive and transcend our death. What is this thing? No less than a vessel and vehicle of the soul. And actually, the process establishes our soul. Whether we have but one lifetime and start from scratch, or perhaps are granted at inception a provisional soul and have multiple lifetimes to make it durable, lest we eventually be lost back into the cosmic furnace to get recycled into entirely fresh material and potentialities, I do not know. But suppose I find the notion contentious that all humans do not possess an eternal soul. What if it is the antithesis of what I believe? Can I take this opportunity here or for that matter, with any new input, to ask myself, am I open to considering? Do I nurture my ability to note my first reactions and then feel out? Can I possibly use this? I do find it helpful to see crystallization as the seat of the master and the master as the seat of the soul. Let's refer again to In Search of the Miraculous, with Ouspensky again conveying Gurdjieff's teaching. To be able to speak of any kind of future life, there must be a certain crystallization, a certain fusion of man's inner qualities, a certain independence of external influences. If there is anything in a man able to resist external influences, then this very thing itself may also be able to resist the death of the physical body. End quote. This reveals part of the nature of this crystallization. It is something that stands apart from the influences of the world, rises above identification with worldly matters. The text continues. But think for yourselves what there is to withstand physical death in a man who faints or forgets everything when he cuts his finger. If there is anything in a man, it may survive. If there is nothing, then there is nothing to survive. End quote. Indeed, this whole perspective contradicts the popular paradigm that everyone makes it, that ultimately every soul evolves, gets enlightened, achieves bliss, joins with God, however one wishes to put this. That lifetimes may expend blind to spiritual work or in avoidance or even doing harm, all part of a soul's experience to learn lessons and then make better choices, or even to not do the work and still be raised up in some sort of cosmic celestial tide wherein all boats get lifted. But in nature, not everything makes it. I can remember being disheartened watching a nature show on television in my 30s, seeing a dead bobcat in the snow, starved in winter. And I had been a farmer, had seen animals and plants fail to thrive, and still I carried false idealism. How could nature do this, not care for its own? Fritz Peters wrote a book, Boyhood with Gurdjieff, about his experience at the Prieure, Gurdjieff's institute, as an American boy. This is part of a conversation between Gurdjieff and Fritz, uniquely rendered with Gurdjieff's vernacular, broken English. He, Gurdjieff, then asked me to look out the window and tell him what I saw. I said that all I could see was an oak tree. And what, he asked, was on the oak tree? I told him, acorns. How many acorns? When I replied uncertainly that I did not know, he said, not exactly, not ask that. Guess how many? I said, I supposed there were several thousand. He agreed and then asked how many of the acorns would become oak trees. I answered that I supposed only 5 or 6 of them would develop into trees, if that many. He nodded. Perhaps only one, perhaps not even one. Must learn from nature. Man is also organism. Nature make many acorns, but possibility to become tree only exists for few acorns. Same with man. Many men born, but only few grow. People think this waste, think nature waste. Not so. Rest become fertilizer, go back into earth and create possibility for more acorns, more men, once in a while more tree, more real man. Nature always give, but only give possibility. To become real oak or real man must make effort. You understand this, my work, this institute, not for fertilizer, for real men only, but must also understand fertilizer necessary to nature, possibility for real tree, real man, depend just this fertilizer. After a rather long silence, he continued, in West, your world, is belief that man have soul given by God. Not so. Nothing given by God. Only nature give, and nature only give possibility for soul, not give soul. Must acquire soul through work. End quote. Did Gurdjieff or those before him concoct this so that we would work on ourselves and not fall to procrastination, tell ourselves, I will rest now, play now, do the work in my next lifetime? This has helped spur me on. We can also look to the parable of the sower, Matthew 13 in the Bible, in words ascribed to Jesus. A farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell on rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow. But when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, many times what was sown. Whoever has ears, let them hear. End quote. Christ also said, I am the way. I've long contemplated the meaning as I am is the way, which is to say, the path is through Christos, one's Crystallization. Beyond the sense in the parable in Gurdjieff's acorn analogy, my own logic tells me, if there is free will, we must be allowed to fail. This brings us to our second quote, another aphorism. One of the best means for arousing the wish to work on yourself is to realize you may die at any moment, but first you must learn how to keep it in mind. One of the best means for arousing the wish to work on yourself is to realize that you may die at any moment, but first you must learn how to keep it in mind. Is this clear? Here's an alternate version or translation that I think adds insight. It's from Kenneth Walker, a longtime Ouspensky student. And it goes like this. One of the strongest motives or the wish to work on yourself is the realization that you may die at any moment, only you must first realize this. I take this as to make present my knowing, to make present my knowing, to make real the realization. Gurdjieff considered reality the realm of the realized being. Not his word realm, but it contains the word real, which I like. A place that is real, a realm. That he emphasized this shows in the title of his third series book, which is our third line quote. Life is real only then when I am. Life is real only then when I am. It also appears in the title of a book of Gurdjieff's early talks, Views from the Real World, in which the aphorisms, in fact, were first published. This is about becoming a real man as opposed to pseudo-man or man in quotation marks, using Gurdjieff's terms, or real woman, woman without quotation marks. I remember in the presence of my teacher, I would sometimes ask myself, is she realized? Is this what being fully realized looks like? Not judgmentally, but to inform myself, align myself, renew intention, to absorb as the model. This is my goal. What lies ahead for me if I was born into a Gurdjieff family, my father electing to be my first teacher from the cradle on. At an early age, I was brought into the children's group at the New York Foundation. Later, during my teens and early 20s, independent of my family, I lived in a Gurdjieff community based on a 300-acre farm founded by Mrs. March, a direct student of Gurdjieff. Life at the farm was intense in both inner and outer ways. While there, I was taken with the idea of crystallization and evolving my future existence. That it fit me might or might not seem paradoxical, given that I'd just come through a boyhood marked by past life recollections. Then, sometime around the fall of 1974, when I was 21 years of age, we had a group meeting called while Mrs. March was away. Normally, no meeting occurred when she was absent from us, as there was no substitute for her. So I was curious as we assembled in the old dining room of the house, the dozen or more of us in the middle group of the three, beginner, middle, advanced. We were given paper and pens and a writing assignment. What had we learned from Mrs. March? I sat with my paper, frustrated for a while, and then started. I expressed in a clumsy way that the place was my teacher. What I meant was that the conditions Mrs. March had instilled at the farm were feeding and supporting my work of self-transformation more than her words ever could. What I couldn't articulate was that her presence inspired me more than the methods and information and even the personal feedback that she gave. And when I think about it, it seems audacious to have said something like this, to admit that there was nothing direct from her. But I was forced into honesty by the circumstance of the place where we were and the time We were in a cauldron. We were in a crucible in those days there. Then I became conscious of my hand continuing, almost in the form of automatic writing. What flowed out were words to the effect that I now was aware of an inner fire, which had sprung into being within myself. I wrote that this fire occupied my center, manifesting as a flame in a dish of oil. I understood this flame was the fire of my constancy, which would continue as long as I tended it. Its directive was that I visit this fire often, sit with it, add oil as needed, and to sweep the floor around the dish in which it burned. I was fairly stunned as I handed in my paper. Inside, I was feeling more information, which came in the next short while. This was the fire of my self-motivation. I had reached the point that Mr. Gurdjieff had spoken of, where the student becomes self-responsible, dependable, and isn't reliant on the prodding of the teacher. Not that I couldn't receive further, but now I generated my own impetus. It was as if I had found my feet. I realized that with this fire and its temple, I had attained my own center, and this was the true beginning in me of the sacred I am, of which Gurdjieff spoke, although not in the imagery he or Mrs. March or any other teacher I knew of used. So, this was the result of what? What had I done to deserve this gain that had happened to me? On reflection, 1. Predisposition. I was inclined and suited to self-work. Likely would not have occurred had I not been born to my particular father. And for that, and to him, I am forever grateful. 2. Surely, grace. Praise God. Next, persistent repetition of small tasks, self-seeing, remembering myself, intentional suffering, which I call biting the bullet. Mrs. March provided the matrix for this, along with my fellow pilgrims on the path in that community. Some of you are here, and I thank you. I thank you all. And finally, many super efforts for which I owe thanks to Gurdjieff. Which leads into our next line quote, only super efforts count. Only super efforts count. My interpretation. All else contributes, but super efforts put us over the top. Super effort, I'll define as conscious exertion above the ordinary and beyond what is necessary, employs will. One such exercise in will, for me, involved physically staying awake. At the farm, everyone put forth extra effort ahead of our semi-annual craft sales, many working late into the nights. I began to try all-nighters, curious to see what state they would put me in. Finding this rewarding, I resolved at one point to stretch myself to see how far I could go. I lasted 3 days and nights, working some 60 hours outside of meals, much of it silkscreening pages of a book aptly titled How Quest Sought the Truth, an old Croatian folk tale. before falling into a dead sleep on the studio floor. Not every super effort counts. It should be directed by aim. It is typically voluntary, but not always. It can be one's attitude adjustment to the inevitable, such as going to the dentist. For me, they are usually physical. They can also be emotional and mental, or as components, enduring cold, boredom, criticism, to start to get control over reactions, to connect will with purpose, to begin to wrest oneself from the forces of willy-nilly. The mystic Osho, in his book Ultimate Alchemy, shares this perspective. Surrender is one basic path, the path of the bhaktas. Tap will is the second basic path, the path of warriors, fighters. Each path has many techniques, but this is the essential thing. Gurdjieff used the second path, the path of the will. He called it crystallization. He said, if you will, then by and by you will crystallize into your center. End quote. In other words, if you begin to exert will, you will advance in and by will. For me, this inner fire was a delicate thing at first. A fire will expire if not fed. The way to it can be lost. It can get forgotten, like anything. This was not like I was being switched on. I had to earn and firm up this new actuality by frequent visits. It called for greater mindfulness. In some ways, life got harder. Which brings us to our next quote, an aphorism. Blessed is he who has a soul. Blessed is he who has none. But woe and grief to him who has it in embryo. Blessed is he who has a soul. Blessed is he who has none. But woe and grief to him who has it in embryo. Here's an analogy. Let's say I want to be a carpenter. I'm an apprentice, learning. I make mistakes. I get chastised. I'm beholden. I'm given the hard work. I do the dirty work. When I'm a carpenter, it's good. I know my craft. If I'm not a carpenter, it's fine. I can dream about it or do something else. It's the in-between that's tough, the becoming. Our next quote concurs. A man may be born, but in order to be born, he must first die. And in order to die, he must first awaken. A man may be born, but in order to be born, he must first die. And in order to die, he must first awaken. After the farm, I went into years of introspection with the sensation of turning over stones, pondering the aspects of life as they arose, wondering, how do I regard this and this? What do I believe or know? Then years of patient inner work I saw as foundation building, digging, leveling, laying the footer, the blocks. And I was a builder, so the image fit. But to see how long it takes a building to come out of the ground before the superstructure can proceed, there's a feeling of, will this ever end? Concurrently, I felt the image of building spiritual capital, putting money in a bank. Now, after the fact, I see how my two analogies were tangentially related. Spiritual capital funds the house I am building. This next quote reinforces that idea. All energy spent on conscious work is an investment. That spent mechanically is lost forever. All energy spent on conscious work is an investment. That spent mechanically is lost forever. Along the way, I found healers to help me alleviate old trauma. I did grounding work to bring myself fully into the world, into my body. Severe, dark nights of the soul were part of my embryonic journey. The more intense my work, the more my dark side rose up, ostensibly to stop me, but ultimately to be resolved, burnt off. Another round of super efforts followed in a sweat lodge group as fire tender under a Delaware medicine man and my elemental teacher, fire. Sweat lodge is also called purification lodge. Over time, this caused my quiet flame of constancy to leap up and through me. There was much more. Initiations, rounds of emptying, inner family work. I feel like I was 45 years in that embryonic stage until the last 5 or 6 years when I've been experiencing greater ease, life becoming more a dance of working with conditions, adjusting to find and enter the greater flow, along with a feeling of living in the home I've built. To continue my foundation analogy, I conclude this section with a poem I wrote many years ago near the tail end of my sweat lodge days. Peace. My soul is eternal. Nothing can hurt me. I am of my center. The fire of my constancy burns there, and there I listen at the mouth of the channel where the voice of God comes through. And from my center, through my spiral dance, spooling into the world, I manifest my creator. Ho! There is another piece, a short piece that I'm going to get in there, but I want to hear what you have to say.
I have a few things I'm wondering about. I'm just not quite clear on some of the concepts. So, would you say that crystallization is the same as the ability to stay present?
No, not exactly. It's connected. When the I am is established, it's much easier to be present and to connect with the present, to return to the present.
Okay. Well, in the beginning, you were talking about the drive to crystallize. Is that something you would say comes from your body? Because I'm used to thinking about things from an intellectual standpoint, and that doesn't work. So, where would the drive come from to crystallize? Is that one of the things that nature gives that you were speaking of? Could you say a bit more about that?
It's when you're able to connect with your wish. It is related to developing your wish, your aim. It's a conscious effort to go in a certain direction.
Like, I feel like I'm missing a piece, and I don't know what the piece is, of course, because it's missing. In the beginning of the talk, when you were speaking of recognizing that we're going to die, my mind is saying that's just survival and that's not what this is about. So I'm kind of lost.
You might do some reading in in search of the miraculous and contemplate on it. I don't think there's a ready answer that will probably make it click. It's something that I think you could sit with if you were interested. And then it will come. The understanding will come.
Okay. So far, the only bit of reading I've done in your tradition is the reality of being, which I found was very much about where we place our attention in our bodies. I'll look into it more. Thank you.
What is the importance of connecting with your body in order to perform the process of crystallization?
You're asking very hard questions here. All three centers of our existence deserve our attention and our love. Our body deserves our love, our mind deserves our love, and our feelings deserve our love. We shouldn't neglect or omit any of those. Our body is our friend, and it can help take us to where we want to be.
Aren't we in a different center of gravity when we're in our bodies as opposed to being in our minds? If I don't explore the center of gravity in my body, I may be losing out. Attention, presence comes to mind right now.
Balance is so important in the work, the balance of the attention that we give to each of our parts, each of our centers, the balanced approach, not too much in one area and not neglecting one area either. We want to bring all of us with us.
My understanding of the crystallization was to develop the centers. You will form this real I, and it will crystallize in yourself so you can hold it. I don't think I'll be able to achieve that crystallization or achieving the real I. So I just imagined or considered as being one of the acorns falling out of the tree, going into the ground, coming back up as another person, try again, and just continuing that cycle.
I just wanted to say hi to Carl, to thank him from the bottom of my heart for being my brother in the work.
Paul, I love you.
What you said about wish, that's where it has to begin and aim. As far as the aphorism, you must first learn how to keep it in mind. I still think there's a lot of hope there for everyone who wants to begin, for all of us that have been in the work for so long. And just to be able to speak brings more of a feeling. So I'm grateful that I'm here.
Thank you.
Right at the beginning, you characterized our very beginning as being fragmented with our centers unrelated. And I have all these impressions from watching my kids grow up. And now I have, kind of late in the game, a new grandchild who just spent about a week over here. While I watched her and the way she touched everything and examined everything, I had this impression that so much in her was unified that we actually lose our unity through the way we grow up and the way we're educated. And then we have to regain it, but we can't really go back and be children again. And yet those images touch me very much, as if that sense of unity retreated early in life and now has a chance to find its way again, so that you're, in a sense, could be reborn, but not as a child, as a grown-up. And I find that those worlds are commingled somewhat. There is a kind of deep memory of being a complete being.
I was interested in what you said about the different paths that Osho referred to, a path of surrender and a path of developing will. I think that's how you put it, something like that. And I come from a path and a tradition which is more about surrender. And I really find there to be a resonance, even though the language and approach is very different in some ways. For example, I sense that a real I develops if one is truly, fully surrendered to the life process, moment to moment, as I believe masters have been throughout history, including Gurdjieff, it seems to me. And if that is one state, there is this sense of a real I that we are attracted to. At least that was my own case with my teacher. It was more a matter, as you referred to Mrs. March, of what I experienced in that presence rather than anything else, really. The teaching made sense, but it was something other than that. I also sense that a real I is a matter of love as a stable state of being. To experience a state of love permanently in one's life, it might have very different manifestations, but I think that that arises out of a real I. Also, this idea of crystallization, one of the ways that I've considered that is crystallization in a completely opposite way, in a mechanical way, about how our habits crystallize. And we walk through life thinking that we're living, but not really living. And you're talking about crystallization, of course, in a very different way. And super efforts. Seems like the common way of understanding super efforts has more to do with supporting false personality. People are driven to attain, to achieve things for themselves, to be a star, and rather than the wish to know oneself. For me, the idea of super effort has more to do with being with what is and all that comes up around that, which requires effort to be with my own reactions and other experiences rather than trying to manipulate them or avoid them, rather than to try to make some super effort to get to some imagined place.
Yes, Gurdjieff points out there are negative ways that one can crystallize and make super efforts. So it is important to make the right efforts in the right direction, for sure. Your conscience can guide you, and the purity of your aim, you can cleave to that. Let me interject this last piece, and then we'll have a little more time to exchange. So then, what comes after becoming? We began this talk with the aphorism, here there are neither Russian nor English, Jews nor Christians, but only those who pursue one aim, to be able to be. Now we come to our eighth quote, another of the aphorisms. The highest that a man can attain is to be able to do. The highest that a man can attain is to be able to do. Could these not seem like competing maxims? I think no, because they are rather forming a progression. One must first be, and then one can do. Being, the result of unification, allows doing. Doing is conscious, purposeful action as compared with automatic behavior. Doing is function of freedom and will, which are the purview of being. Learning to do is the next step after becoming. Learning to exercise freedom and wield will. Working to align one's will with the will of God, with rather than against or at random. To be clear, all true doing is service to soul, humanity, creation. Being is itself service as well. In this sense, being is doing. These are because consciousness serves, inner work serves. They serve to balance their opposite, thereby assist in world maintenance. Of course, there can be more. I can ask, what is worthy of the expenditure of my energy in my remaining days? What is the best use of my available energy today, at this moment? This will accord with the aims I set, my intention, my calling. What do I wish? Why am I here? Now I have the latitude to explore, the freedom. Gurdjieff said, free will is the function of the master within us. Our will is the supremacy of one desire over another. Gurdjieff said, there are two kinds of doing, automatic and doing what you wish. Take a small thing which you wish to do and cannot do and make it your God. Let nothing interfere. If you wish, you can. Wish is the most powerful thing in the world. Our next to last line quote brings in another slant. Love. He who can love can be. He who can be can do. He who can do is. He who can love can be. He who can be can do. He who can do is. This highlights the importance of love in our transformation, a subject in itself. But do you not cherish as I do the kernel, he or she who can do is? Our final axiom is from Lord John Pentland, who was appointed by Gurdjieff to organize the work in North America, and who, by the way, was my father's teacher. He says, there comes a point in the work when it is clear that I do not remember myself. I am remembers. There comes a point in the work when it is clear that I do not remember myself. I am remembers. Ah, a glimmer. Ordinary me cannot remember. My nascent I am does, and I can anchor to that. It remembers itself. My true self is what recalls me. Ah, there you are. Here I am. To remember is to put myself back together, to reunify. If I am is established in me, I still fall apart because I am human. Hence Gurdjieff's aphorism, remember yourself always and everywhere. But it is not my scattered self that does it. I am remembers. Let that be true. Thank you.
Is there anything more you can say about wish?
It's the most powerful thing. And so it's something to contemplate and sit with. It's something to internalize. It's something to make it mine.
The real aim of everything, is it not try to really, really be happy? I guess it's a big question. Crystallization is the aim of that, to really be happy. not to be identified anymore with the past. That's the way I see it. Try to be happy, just like Swami Prajnapada told Arno. But real happy, not phony happiness, just real happiness.
Yeah, thank you. That's good information. It's a good idea.
The confusion of multiplicity and distraction is so deceptive and ever present, but the clarity that can come from reintegrating and centering is so strong.
The aphorism, blessed is he who has a soul, blessed is he who has no soul, but woe be to him who has a soul in embryo. And I feel like that is where the work is. It is in the embryonic struggle in this work for the soul.
I think that we all have a sense of a crystallized I. Most of the time we forget it entirely. But spaces like this, for me, unearth that.
I hope that I've given some food for thought, some impressions. You have given me some too, and you have fed me by being here.